Bin chase. I woke just once sometime after dark and took a minute before realizing where I was. Since the house was quiet and dark, I assumed that my host was asleep and it was night. I lay there for a few minutes just trying to feel something other than the pain, but that was all I had. I closed my eyes again and tried to think of a warm beach on a clear blue ocean in a tropical resort, but saw only my wife being effed by another man. I squeezed my eyes shut and bit down on my lip so the pain would break my thoughts. It worked, and I let the physical pain overcome the mental. I fell asleep trying to keep them separate. The next time I woke, it was daytime, and the sun was coming in the gaps around the blinds drawn over the window. I thought I could smell coffee, and I swung my legs out of the bed and onto the soft carpeted floor. I sat there, trying to wake up, and finally rose to try to find a John to relieve quite a few hours of piss. I walked out of the room and saw the John to the left down a short hall. I shuffled to the door and found a neat bathroom with the ubiquitous Guest soaps and Guest towels. Whatever. I needed to piss, and then to splash some water on my face, which I proceeded to do. I noticed the shower and a couple of nice bath towels and thought, what the hell? I took a nice hot shower with a cold rinse and I felt like a new man. I dried myself off with one of the nice fluffy towels and dressed in my dirty clothes. Well, at least the body was clean. I found Bill in the kitchen, and he greeted me with a mug of hot black coffee. I took the mug gratefully and sipped the strong liquid, feeling some life flow into me. I raised my head and looked at him to see him watching me. I hope I hadn't said anything too bad last night, but the way I was feeling, I could have. But as I returned his gaze, I saw only friendliness and interest. I now remembered I had begun to tell him my story. I think it had finally caught up with me during my telling, and I don't remember much after that. Well, Bill, what did I do and how bad was it? I guess I don't remember much about last night except that you were there and we started talking. Did I tell you much before I passed out? You were fine, Ben, and we got along great. You were telling me about your folks, and we had just begun to get into things when everything finally came down on your shoulders. I just brought you here, gave you a bite to eat, and then helped you to bed before you collapsed right here on the floor. Looks like the rest did you good. How do you feel this morning? 1,000% better than yesterday, that's for sure. I appreciate what you did for me, and I apologize for putting you through that. You had no need to do that for someone you don't even know. Well, it's sort of what I used to do. I'm a psychiatrist, or at least I used to be. Haven't practiced for over 2 years, but you caught my interest, and truth be told, I was bored to death. So, I don't think I was doing you any favors. It was more selfish than that. Well, I appreciate the bed and the food, but I don't want to impose. I'll just be heading out if you can point me in the direction of the bar where I believe I left my car. Well, I can do that, but to be honest, I do wish you would stay and finish your story. I was really caught up in your family and I was waiting for what was coming next. I'll make us some breakfast and we can eat and then go into what passes for my study, and you can finish telling me your story. Please think about it while I put on some bacon and eggs. Well, as he talked, most of last night came back to me, and I did remember telling him about my mom and dad and letting him read Mom's letter. I also remember feeling somewhat better after telling him what I did. Maybe I could stay, and we could talk. Could be something good could come from it, and I had nowhere else to go. As I thought that, I found I had no desire to talk to Beth, or to even call her. It was still too painful to go there. Bill was as good as his word, and we sat down to a huge breakfast of bacon, eggs, hash browns, and hot buttered toast. It went down real good and I enjoyed every last bite. Bill put his share away as well, and he seemed to enjoy having the company. I remember he did say his wife had died a year or so ago, so I imagine he was quite lonely most of the time. No kids and no relatives close by, he said. Well, we finished. I helped clear the table and dry while he washed, and we took our coffee into the room he called his study. It was dark, warm, and gave me a good feeling as I sat down in a soft leather chair, while Bill took the swivel chair behind the desk. He looked right at home, so I could see him practicing his craft from here. Well, can you tell me where I left off last night before I made a fool of myself? I just don't remember much after giving you Mom's letter. You told me you had graduated as a chemical engineer and had seen a lot of the world but wanted to settle down at home. I remembered now. I had taken Mom's letter back and folded it neatly into its dog-eared envelope and put it back in my jacket pocket. That's when the fatigue hit me and I almost lost it. Okay, I would start there and see what came out. The company I worked for put me to work directing new construction projects around the East Coast. We had several new refineries and cracking facilities going in, and I had lots of experience in those areas, so I moved around the area, looking at sites, organizing contractors, setting up schedules, and in general coordinating. I was a good coordinator, easy to work with, quick to adjust to changes, and just hard-assed enough to get the job done without pissing everyone off. I did quite well financially, and I was able to put a lot away for the proverbial rainy day. Things were very good. That's when I met Annabeth Foster. Beth was a realtor, and she and I met on the job. I had dealings with her, and we got to know each other really well over a period of several weeks, and I finally asked her out. We dated for some time, and we both knew it was serious. I finally proposed to her about 6 months later, and she accepted. We were married in 1997, in Chester, where we still live. Or at least we used to. I don't know anymore. I stopped to take a drink of the coffee, but found it cold. I told Bill to hold on till I got a refill. It gave me time to swallow the bile that threatened to come up into my mouth. I took several deep breaths and held my breath until my stomach quieted down again. The coffee suddenly didn't appeal to me, so I left the cup in the kitchen and picked up a glass of water instead. I went back in and sat down. Bill took one look, and I think he guessed what had happened. But to his credit, he said nothing. My job takes me away from home several times a month. I'm usually not very far, but sometimes I just choose to stay in a motel rather than make the long drive home. Since I have to turn right around the next day, it's simpler. Beth hates it, but it is a lot easier on me that way. I've been doing that since we were married 8 years ago, and she knew it going in. But lately she's been complaining more and more about it. So I try to limit my trips, but it wasn't enough apparently. I had to stop for a moment since my anger had flared up during that last thought. I still wanted to tell my story to Bill, but I had to bite down on my anger, or else it would just become a bitching session. Anyway, Beth and I had discussed kids, but neither of us really wanted them. She thought maybe later on, but I don't think she was serious. We've been lucky so far that she hasn't gotten pregnant. Our life has always been great. We made out on our first date, and we have been lovers ever since. We have it maybe 2 times a week and often more than that. Beth is easy to arouse, and she had no trouble coming to an ending or two during our lovemaking. I'm sorry for wandering around on you, Bill, but it's getting harder and harder as I get closer and closer to what happened. I hope you can stay with me. I'll get there, I promise. Bill Austin. I could see that Ben was struggling as he began to get closer in time to the event that triggered his traumatic flight from his home. I had not had to guide or steer him so far, and he seemed to have a natural flair for telling a story. If he could go through without guidance from me, the story would be closer to how he saw it rather than how I directed him to see it. Right now, he was breathing a little hard, and I could see the pain in his face as events got more and more stressful. I thought this might be a good time to take a break. Why don't we stop for a few minutes to get some iced tea? I have a gallon of sweet tea in the refrigerator, and it's really good. I'll get some ice, and we can take a walk around the yard till you feel calm enough to continue. I know this can be very stressful, and it's important that you remain as calm as possible so we can get the truth about everything. What do you mean, the truth? Why would I lie to you? I don't even know you well enough to be talking to you, but for some reason I want to. Strange, but true. Anyway, I won't lie. Not intentionally, but the mind plays tricks when it's in pain. I don't mean you would lie about anything, but stress may make you say things you don't mean or interpret things in a way that is incorrect. Let's just take the time, okay? Ben agreed, so I got us both a glass of iced tea, and we took it out the back door and onto my little deck. We stood at the railing and gazed at the trees lining the back of my lot. Behind the trees were woods, deep and old. I had investigated some of the trails running away into the woods, but they led nowhere. It was pleasant just to stand and watch the wind toss the leaves, making silver flashes when the undersides turned over. We stood there for 10 minutes or so, and I could see Ben begin to relax. It was good to see some peace come over him. I answered some of his questions about me when he started to ask. It was no secret, so I answered him as truthfully as possible. He seemed interested, and we talked about me for a little while. We stayed out there for some time, until it began to get a little chilly. It was warm for September, but not for someone my age. I led Ben back into the warm kitchen, and we sat at the kitchen table, a little more casual than my study. This way, Ben might remain more relaxed. I would urge Ben to begin his story again with a more relaxed attitude. Annabeth Chase. Remembering the past wasn't doing me any good. Why think about what I had instead of how I screwed it up? I know I screwed up big time, but I don't know why. How in the hell did it get to this point in my life? I loved Ben with all my heart, and he is the only man I have ever loved. I loved him from the first date, and I've never wavered once. Even when we argued and fought, I never felt differently. I could get angry and yell at him, but I always knew that he would be there for me if I needed or wanted him. He felt the same about me, I was sure. But now, I honestly didn't know what he felt. All I could remember was the look on his face when he came into the bedroom and saw me and George together. Even now, 3 days later, I could see his face. I saw it in my dreams, when I closed my eyes or when I looked in the mirror. The pain, the disappointment, and the anger all there in his eyes as he watched George Jenkins F me from behind. I thought again about how it had come to be. George and I flirted outrageously during our times together at the Manor House. He always found a way to be next to me in the serving line, and he made it a point to press against me in different ways, reaching across me for something, reaching over to point to something, handing me a spoon or ladle with our hands touching longer than necessary. I understood what he was doing even then, but I didn't object or even try to stop it. I loved the flirting and the implied promise, even though I never intended to keep it. It was just a game, an innocent game with a cute man who was interesting and interested in me. I was flattered and somewhat aroused by the thought, but I never intended anything other than innocent fun. The last time we had worked together was just a week ago Wednesday. I was serving the potatoes and George was handling the vegetables. We had been serving and laughing while working, and there was a lot of touching and bumping. It was always crowded behind the counter, but not that crowded. But I enjoyed it as always and did my share of touching as well. Things were fun until the rush died and George and I were relieved to take a break. Since George smoked, I often accompanied him outside in the back so he could have his cigarette. I didn't mind as Ben still smoked a little. I was leaning against the wall, enjoying the feel of the warm September sun on my face with my eyes closed. George had pulled out his cigarettes and his lighter, and I waited for the metallic click of the metal top, thinking of nothing in particular. Just as I was about to ask him something, I felt his lips on mine. The shock was intense, but the feeling of pleasure was something I was unprepared for. I felt a warm tingle in my lips as he kissed me with more intensity. I responded and kissed him back. As I enjoyed the unfamiliar feelings, his tongue pushed against my lips and I opened to him. The pleasure intensified as we kissed, and I felt his arms come around me and pull my body tight against his. I was almost lost in the sensations. I was totally relaxed in his arms, and I murmured his name into his mouth when I suddenly realized what I was doing. I knew it was wrong, but it felt so good. I wanted this to continue, but I knew it couldn't, at least not here. I pushed back, away from his body and his kiss, and held out my hand to stop him. Then the guilt began. What the hell was I doing? This was not my husband. This was another man, and I had let my body betray me into feelings and desires that were wrong. Wrong. I tried to say something to George, but the words couldn't make their way through my tightened throat. I was having difficulty breathing, and I finally just turned away and ran back through the door into the storeroom, where I grabbed my coat and purse and, mumbling something to the first person I saw, left. I found my car and drove home almost on instinct. Once home, I ran into the bathroom, tore off my clothes and staggered into the shower where I let the hot water run and run, cleaning my deceitful body of those desires and sensations that shamed me. I finally calmed down enough to begin dinner for Ben while I fought hard to put the whole episode out of my mind. I was ashamed of what I had done, but at the same time, exhilarated, and I knew then that I could no longer work at the Manor House with George. I had lost control of myself today, and there was no assurance that it wouldn't happen again in the same circumstances. I had no control and no thoughts while it was happening, and it could have gotten much worse. No, I had to quit. I would call tomorrow and let them know. With that decision made, I felt much better, and when Ben came home, I was in a good mood. We ate a nice meal, watched some television, and went to bed where I made Ben very, very happy. It had been a long time since I had given him a BJ and let him return the favor, but that night I did that and more. It was great and Ben was content. Only once did I have a thrill of fear when he asked me what had gotten into me. I just laughed and said I had watched an Oprah that turned me on. He let it go. I resigned as I planned and things seemed to calm down over the next few weeks. Ben had been working on a project close to Chester where we lived, and he was always home by 5 o'clock or 5:30 p.m. Things were good and I was content. The episode with George gradually faded to a pleasant memory, and I began to consider other things to do with my time. Maybe a garden? Something close to home? Something safe? Well, I had some ideas and I would let them develop. It was a week later when Ben told me that he had to drive over to a town called Ambridge in the western part of the state. I was a little upset, reminding him that we had planned to meet Roger and Stacy for dinner. They were two of our best friends, and we often went out to dinner together. When he looked at me like I was just a little slow and said to call them and cancel, I got angry. I couldn't understand how he could be so unconcerned. This was too much like it had been before, and it was too much for me to take without comment. I remember getting into it with him, and I think I was overreacting when I screamed at him, telling him he was an insensitive prick. I think those were the words. I know I started to cry, and I finally just ran to our bedroom and lay there on the bed sobbing uncontrollably. While I was there, Ben left to go to work. That's how we left it. I stayed there until my anger cooled and then went outside to my new project, a fish pond with outdoor goldfish. Ben had helped me install it, and we had planted a nice border around it with a bench to sit and watch. It was a beautiful little place, and Ben and I both loved it already, but now it had lost some of its glamour. I was still angry, and I wanted Ben to understand that he had to begin to put me first rather than his job. Maybe I was being selfish, but there it was. I was going to have it out with him when he got back from this trip. Next part will come out tomorrow. Subscribe so you won't miss it.